Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we bring you the pedagogy, the practice, and the politics around public education. And we do it every week, and we have yet to run out of material, folks. Have the great resignation going on, not only in the corporate world, but also in the education world. I don't know if some of you have seen the headlines around superintendents now resigning. I've been bringing information about teacher burnout, teachers not coming back from break, teachers needing subs because they're gone from the classroom more than they've ever been. And now we're seeing a new trend, and that is the trend of superintendents not coming back. We saw a district here in the Dallas area, a large urban district, whose superintendent brought a lot of diversity to the schools in both trainings. Now, this is a white superintendent, but she was well known for the innovative ways of making her kids of color feel seen, and her staff trained on that. And recently she did two things. One is she had a mask mandate, despite the governor saying that he did not approve mask mandates. She did it anyway because she knew it was the safe thing to do for her students and her staff. And then she continued with diversity training for her staff and to make sure her students of color, which is the majority of the district, had that opportunity to see the whole side of the picture. And interestingly enough, even though the chair of that board is African-American, there is one Hispanic on there. The rest of the board, and usually you have 9, are white. And so there's been enough. There wasn't a lot in the news before her resignation. They kept it quiet, the little, whatever you want to call it, infighting, bickering, but she is resigning as of now. And then at the same time, I saw that superintendent of another district, not too far from this area, also is not coming back next year. At the same time, this morning, I read that this week, the parents at the Fort Worth ISD, which is about 45 minutes an hour away, is part of the Metroplex, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. The parents were very upset because they recently found out that teachers were getting trained in cultural diversity, which they named as CRT, and they were all against CRT. Folks, again, we have got to really be careful about what's happening it is society as a whole. The public schools are a reflection of what's happening, right, in society, but goodness gracious, if we don't get a handle on this, we will, our kids will suffer the consequences of it for the next few years. So part of me thought, well, what can we do as a society to prepare to prepare parents better in this environment? So I'm sort of getting known for my checklists and my to-do lists for others, especially teachers and parents. But I thought that based on the teacher, principal, and superintendent resignations that are happening all over the nation, I thought, what can parents do to help alleviate this at the local level, right? At the field level, the schools. And so here's some suggestions. Make an appointment to chat with your children's teachers to say, hey, I want to do a wellness check on you. I'm hearing a lot about teacher burnout, teachers wanting to leave. Let's chat. How are you doing, right? And so ask them if there's anything that parents can do to support them for the rest of the school year. And I don't mean till, just this, I mean till May, end of May, right? So based on what the teacher tells you, maybe you and other parents can get together and create an actionable list of things that can be used to support staff. Here's another suggestion. Meet with the principal of the school and make the same offer in what you and possibly a group of parents can do to better support him or her and the staff. So go to the principal. Consider getting with the PTO or PTA of the school and joining their work and supporting staff. And that should be a no-brainer, but gosh, it's been a busy year. And so let's, if you haven't done it, good time to join the PTO or PTA of your school and see how you can support the work that way. Here's an interesting one. Consider grouping up with several parents who are available to go through the sub-training of the district and really become an asset to that school. Let's say that you can find 5 or 7 other parents who are available during the day to sub, and you'll all go through sub-training together, make it a group thing. And wow, what an asset to a school to say to a principal, hey, a bunch of us have gotten together, we've gone through the district training for substitutions, and we are ready to support our school this way. And so that'll do several things. If you could be lucky enough to have a group of parents who would go through the sub training and become active volunteers, I'm sorry, not volunteers, paid help in the school. Imagine, first of all, being able to fill those openings a little bit more rapidly and not having to divide up classes as much, not having to use office personnel as much, not having to use your TAs as much to cover classes, because your teaching assistants, especially if they're special ed or bilingual, are supposed to be working with kids. That money that they get paid from, those funds, are specific to specific students. And so we can't use special ed funded teaching assistants to sub for a whole class, because then that keeps the kids that teaching assistant works with every week from happening. And to give you a little bit of a special ed IEP, that's an instructional educational plan, and how that works is when a committee meets around a special ed child, the committee together, teacher, principal, special ed teacher, parent, and sometimes students, if they're old enough, will decide how many minutes of extra support a week that child is supposed to get in the contents he or she is struggling in. And so because there are never enough special ed teachers, we oftentimes have special ed teaching assistants who pick up some of those minutes. And if we keep a special ed teaching assistant from meeting with that child and meeting those minutes, those educational minutes as decided by the ARD committee, then that's breaking federal law. I mean, that the school district can be liable in a lawsuit from the parent if the parent can prove that his or her child has not received the correct amount of instructional support as deemed by the ARD committee. So in these days of so many teachers needing mental health days or just having open vacant positions that can't be filled for whatever reason, then the go-to is oftentimes the teaching assistant. And yet, if you only have 4 teaching assistants in your school and 2 of them are supposed to be special ed, that leaves 2 that you may be able to tap into if they're paid for by general funds. In some other schools, you have TAs that are paid for by bilingual funds, and they are tied similarly to the special ed TA to only work with kids who are ESL kids or bilingual kids that are struggling. So you see the dilemma. There's never been enough school, never been enough personnel in school before the pandemic, and now things are worse. So again, as from a parent standpoint, what can you do? I've just given you some suggestions. Another one might be volunteer to tutor either after school, before school, or on Saturdays, depending if they're open, according to what the teachers need for you to do. And that's just, tutoring is just a small piece of it, but anytime parents involve themselves in schools in the way that I've talked about, it gives the parents an insight into the culture and climate of the school. So it's always a good idea to know, how the adults are feeling at a place where your child spends the majority of their day, 5 days a week. And if you're lucky enough to be able to go in there for several hours a week, you will learn something about that building. Hopefully it's good stuff. Hopefully it's, that your child's teachers are staying mentally well. They are, they feel supported by their principal and other administrative staff. And so when that happens, that trickles down to kids. When it doesn't happen, it also trickles down to kids that the teachers are not feeling supported. And matter of fact, there's a book that somebody wrote years ago. It's called Feed Your Teachers So They Don't Eat Their Students. And of course, that's a little funny way of saying, if you don't keep your teachers happy, they won't make their students happy as well as they could otherwise, okay? So let's be smart about making our teachers and our whole staff feel supported from a parenting standpoint. Yes, it's part of the principal's job to support teachers, but principals are getting burned out too. They're another level of resignation I'm reading about. So again, let's all do our part to stay kind to each other, to help where we can. And hopefully I've given you some ideas that you can start, going and making a difference at your child's school. And again, the key is to try to join up with other parents, because in this case, a group of parents will be a bigger asset than just one trying to help alone. So how do we improve education, right? And I have an article that caught my eye because we have spent a lot of time, and now we're in our third school year of talking about educational life after the pandemic or during the pandemic, because really pandemic type of issues are still with us. And so it's this author's contention that to improve education, we need to look at the last 50 years, not just the last 18 months. And that made sense to me. When I first got into education 35 years ago, I used to hear educators say that it takes about 30 years to have positive improvement, change happen in a school. And that sounded bad back then. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we tend to have adults who run the school district. And what do adults hate? They hate change, right? And it takes a handful of innovative adults to do something that causes enough improvement that people notice, and over time that improvement then becomes institutionalized. And in the past it could take 30 years. Well, we don't have 30 years, folks. We've got to start thinking about how to improve school fast now, for a lot of reasons that we've all talked about, the impact of our current kids on our future workforce and our future economy. And things aren't going to look good if we continue to do what we're doing and not having much impact and thinking that they're still going to graduate college and career ready. They're not. So let's see what we have here. Lunches are packed, supplies have been purchased, classrooms are decorated, we're off and running in our third year. Well, okay. Throughout the years, teachers, parents, and students and administrators are still navigating the day-to-day logistics on how to handle the Delta variant, now the Omicron variant. Kids are back in the building, yes, they are, but we're now handling issues of kids who haven't been, many of them haven't been in the building for 2 solid years. I'm hearing our second graders who have spent 2 years outside the classroom when they would have been inside school learning about how to read, how to decode. They're just learning still letters and words in second grade. Second grade is supposed to be the prep year for their testing year that starts in 3rd grade. Folks, we're in trouble. How do we handle the learning loss and the COVID slide now that everybody's back? How badly have our students fallen behind? How have the gaps gotten bigger? How do we fix it? Those are all big questions, and some of them we already know. We know that our students have fallen behind. We know that the gaps have gotten bigger, especially with our kids of color and our kids with disabilities and our kids from low socioeconomic environments. And guess what? They make up the majority of our schools now, especially in the urban areas. So let's talk about the opportunity to change our educational system to meet the needs of all kids, but we need to caution against keeping the focus squarely on COVID, right? Because the truth is, while the pandemic may have exacerbated the existing issues within our educational system, it didn't create them, okay? To evolve our educational system and to improve student outcomes for good, we need to reevaluate our policy making decisions from the last 50 plus years, not just the last 18 months, while we also look forward to what students need to learn to be successful in the future. And we need to examine how we value and invest in teachers and students. We must ensure that students have the basic reading and math competencies, and not only to succeed in college, but trades or military. And most importantly, we have to incorporate equity into everything we do so that all students, regardless of race, ethnicity, zip code, have the opportunity to succeed. The pandemic has accelerated existing trends in remote work, e-commerce, and automation. And as a result, more than 1 in 16 workers, 25% more than before the pandemic, will need to find a new job by 2030. Students entering kindergarten today will graduate in 2034. Will they be ready for the work? Will they be ready for what their world will look like when they go to college or enter the workforce? Right now, things are murky. Not according to long-term test score trends from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is the NAEP. The NAEP is something that's used across the United States to gather information from 4th grade students and 8th grade students in math and reading, and then they're compared to each other across states or compared to international students and so forth. So let's see, assessments like the EdWeek Research Center's analysis of nationwide and state-specific data from 2018 to 2020 show that widening opportunity gaps and a need for better education policies long predated COVID-19 and subsequent COVID slide. Data also show a clear need for equity in all aspects of our educational system, which includes bringing leaders of color into the rooms where policy is being made. While the 2019 NAEP score showed just under half of white 4th grade students were reading at or below, reading at or above proficiency, the number drops to 18%, or roughly 1 in 6 for Black students. For Hispanics or Latino students, 4th grade reading proficiency is at 23%, or just under 1 in 4 students. 8th grade data for Black students, Hispanic and Latino students, and other students of color tells a similar story. Now is the time to reinforce the fundamentals of the scaffolding that determines whether a child has a fair shot at success later in life. This starts by redefining who is making educational policy and how students are assessed, and by providing the needed supports to guarantee a sound basic education for all children. Now, several efforts are underway. Recently, NAEP determined a new reading assessment framework aimed at making the test more equitable, because that's been a big complaint of most tests everywhere, that they're written by normally white people from higher socioeconomic levels, and oftentimes they will write test items where the narrative involves a place, a subject, an activity that is not known to kids from poverty. There have been test items about ski runs. There are test items about the pool's water temperature gauge broke. You know, many of our kids, they don't have swimming pools at home. They don't go on ski vacations. And so anytime you have information in a narrative that is not understandable, the kids then don't know whether that narrative that they don't understand is part of what they need to know to be able to answer the question correctly. So one of the things we used to do, one of the things that I brought to my district, and I'm just because I'm gone doesn't mean they don't do it anymore. I'm sure they still do. And that is, we would, when we created our own assessments for the benchmarks, we would have a culture check. And so they would have to, the teachers would have to do two things. They would have to go through each test item as a team, read the narrative, and look at what the verb of what the verb was asking the kids to know instructionally. And there's lots of ways that they can do that. That's that teaching part that they get trained on. And so they would write what it is the kids need to know at what level, because you have different instructional levels at which kids need to know information. That's that teaching stuff that many parents don't know that is happening with teachers. But the other thing that they had to do was to write down any words in the narrative of each test item that they thought might trip a kid up. So if there's anything in there about lacrosse, of course, my teachers wouldn't write anything about lacrosse, but I'm about even camping experiences, because many of our kids have never been camping. That's just not something that their parents do. Their parents, many of them single parent homes, they're into survival and making it through the week, right? They're not into planning camping vacations. So then when you had the list of cultural words that might catch kids up, they would then figure out how to embed those words into the pre-work without saying, these are the words that are going to be on the test. You don't do that, right? But what you do is, if you have a camping experience as part of your test narrative, then what you can do is you can have a bell ringer that is a way of checking for understanding. And you can, as part of your daily instructional time, you can teach these words and what they mean as part of an upcoming vocabulary. And then when they see it again on the actual test, it's not new anymore. It's something that's been talked about. The teacher has talked about a camping experience that he or she may have had, and maybe even show some pictures. And then maybe kids talk about camping experiences, because some may have had some in the room. And that way, that word or that phrase around camping no longer is going to be a problem for the child on test day. So you can see teaching is more complicated than many parents realized. But so addressing equity within assessments is a huge need in this country. So let's see. So states like North Carolina, which is where this author is from, are addressing broadband access because technology is now a basic need for students in the same way up-to-date textbooks used to be. Learning innovation is happening in Mississippi. Test scores were boosted dramatically after the state made sure that teachers understood the science of how we learn to read. And that's happening in Texas too. We have reading academies for teachers that are mandatory for, I think it's K-5, and all contents, math, social studies, science, they all need to know how to teach to read. And something else that they're changing in Texas is they're taking away the 4th and 7th grade writing tests and embedding writing items into the English language arts tests. So, and there's also talk of putting content. So eventually you wouldn't have a science test or social studies test, you would embed those test items in one test. So there's lots of innovation going on around testing that you as parents need to keep up with. But none of that is enough if we don't engage new voices at the leadership level and incorporate new innovative ideas to create systems of education that look totally different, because our world is totally different. We aren't going back to the way we operated pre-COVID in our workplaces or in our healthcare systems. We've changed as consumers and as people. Why on earth would we go back to pre-COVID educational policies and systems? And we really can't. In some areas, we absolutely can't. We have opened up that online door. For example, my granddaughter is home unfortunately this last week before the break, because she was in direct contact with somebody with COVID. And so now she is, and this is in Kentucky, she now has online classes part of that day while she's home, so that she can not lose and be a week behind. That's never going away. That opportunity to keep kids up when they're homesick, and hopefully we won't have a lot of week off for COVID anymore in the future, but if Johnny breaks his leg and has to be home for a few days before he's up to spending a full day at school, he can then remote in for part of the day and not lose that much time. So you see that our world has continued to evolve. I think we're in the state of evolving into something hopefully more efficient, effective, better for students, better for all students, that we as adults recognize the need to stay calm, stay empathetic, to understand how the pandemic has caused many adults to be angry, and they're taking that anger out in schools, in airports, in grocery lines. Folks, I know that you all aren't doing that because that's not your way, and you've heard me say it enough, right? And so we're together on this to stay calm, cool, and collected better. But we need to help our loved ones, and we need to help our ones closest to us if we see some of those signs of anger. Let's see what we can do to help them recognize that as well. And if they need mental help, then they, gosh, we need to really be better at talking normally about getting help for our mental states. So, as always, time goes by quickly together. Thank you again for being with us, and write any thoughts in the post. You guys tend to be a quiet crew, but I'd love hearing your thoughts and understandings that you gain from being with us each week. Have a great holiday, and stay safe, stay mashed when you need to, and mostly just hug your kids and your grandkids a lot and enjoy the